You think you know your mother's story, the chapters of her life she willingly shared. But what if the most important part was the one she kept locked away? What if a simple, forgotten key could unravel a secret 6 decades in the making? A secret of love, of sacrifice, a secret that would change everything I thought I knew about my family and about myself. Stick with me, because this is a story that asks a question we've all pondered: how well can we ever truly know the people we love most? And if you've ever discovered something surprising about your own family, well, you just might want to like and subscribe, and see where this journey leads us. My mother, Eleanor, was the very definition of a post-war homemaker. Her world was our kitchen, with its scent of simmering pot roast and baking apple pie. Her hands, always slightly flour-dusted, were capable of mending a torn shirt or soothing a fevered brow with equal, quiet competence. She was a woman of routine, of gentle smiles, of humming along to the big band music that whispered from the old radio in the den. To my brother and me, she was simply Mom. A constant, comforting presence, like a well-worn armchair you never think to question, because it has always just been there. We knew her life began in 1925, that she grew up in a small Ohio town, that she met our father, Bill, at a USO dance in '43, and they married as the war ended. It was a story we'd heard 100 times, a history we never doubted. It was comfortable. It was complete. Her past was a photo album she rarely opened. A few black and white snapshots, a serious young girl on the steps of a clapboard house, a teenage Eleanor grinning in a swimming costume by a lake, her face unlined and full of a light I rarely saw in her later years. There was one photo she kept separate, tucked into her jewelry box. It was of a young man in an Army Air Forces uniform, not my father. His smile was rakish, his eyes crinkled at the corners. When I asked about him once, she simply smiled a small, sad smile and said, "That was James. He was a good friend. He didn't make it home." And that was that. The album was closed. The past remained politely in the past, a silent, respectful guest in our home. The call came on a Tuesday. Mom was gone. A quiet passing in her sleep, the coroner said. She was 89. It was the ending she would have wanted, peaceful and without fuss, but the void it left was a chasm in the center of our family. The business of death is a peculiar, hollowing process. There are papers to sign, arrangements to make, a life to be neatly, painfully, boxed up and put away. My brother, David, handled the logistics with a grim efficiency. My task, the one I both dreaded and craved, was to clear out her bedroom, to face the physical remnants of her life. The room still held her scent, a faint mix of lavender talcum powder and the rosewater she always wore. It was in her closet, amidst the familiar rows of sensible shoes and neatly hung floral dresses, that I found it. Tucked on the high shelf, behind a hatbox she'd had for as long as I could remember, was a small, sturdy lockbox. It wasn't large, made of dark wood banded with tarnished brass. It was heavy for its size, and it was locked. There was no key. This was curious. My mother was not a woman for secrets. Her checkbook was balanced to the penny, her Christmas gift lists were written in a ledger. A locked box felt clandestine, out of character. The search for the key became an obsession. I checked drawers I'd already emptied, felt under shelves, ran my fingers along the tops of door frames. It was David who found it, taped with brittle, yellowing adhesive to the underside of her dressing table drawer. It was a small, simple key, cold and weighty in my palm. We looked at each other, a silent question passing between us. What could our practical, transparent mother have possibly needed to hide? With a click that echoed in the quiet room, the lock gave way. I lifted the lid. The contents were a time capsule, a life within a life. On top lay a bundle of letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon. The paper was brittle, the ink a faded brown. The handwriting was elegant, looping, and unmistakably masculine. They were addressed to Miss Eleanor Reed at an address I didn't recognize in a town called Mill Creek, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania. She was from Ohio. Beneath the letters was a smaller photograph. Not a studio portrait, but a candid shot. A young Eleanor, her face radiant with a joy I had never witnessed, was laughing, her head thrown back. And she was looking up at the young man from the other photo, James, but he was out of uniform. He had his arms around her, and they were standing in front of a sprawling, beautiful old farmhouse, surrounded by rolling hills. They looked incandescently happy and utterly in love. Beneath it all, at the very bottom of the box, was a single, official-looking document. It was a birth certificate. It listed the mother's name, Eleanor Marie Reed. The father's name was blank. And the baby's name, Elizabeth Ann Reed. Date of birth, June 17, 1946. My hands began to tremble. 1946. My mother married my father in October of 1945. I was born in 1948. David in 1950. Who was Elizabeth Ann Reed? The math was a cold knot in my stomach. This child was born 9 months after the war ended. My mother would have been pregnant when she married my father. The world tilted on its axis. The quiet, gentle woman who raised me had a child before me. A child whose father was seemingly this dashing airman, James, who didn't make it home. And what happened to that child? My mind raced, constructing and rejecting a dozen terrible scenarios. The dates, the hidden letters, the secret locked away for nearly 70 years. My mother's entire life, the story we all accepted, was a carefully constructed facade. The comfortable narrative of my family was a lie. I spent the next week in a haze, the lockbox contents spread across my own dining room table. I read the letters, my heart breaking with each word. They were from James, stationed in England in 1944. They were full of a young man's bravado, yes, but also a deep, abiding tenderness for my mother. He wrote of their plans, of the farm he would buy for them back in Pennsylvania, of the life they would build when the world was right again. The last letter was dated March 1945. He was coming home. His tour was over. He couldn't wait to hold her again. He signed it, yours, always and forever, James. He never made it. His plane went down over the Atlantic on the way home. The telegram would have arrived. And my mother, she would have been alone. Pregnant. In a small town where such things were not quietly accepted. The birth certificate listed Mill Creek, Pennsylvania. James had written about Mill Creek. It was his hometown. It was the only thread I had to pull. I told David I was going on a trip, a drive to clear my head. I didn't tell him about Elizabeth. I couldn't. Not yet. The drive to Mill Creek was a journey into another America, through rolling farmlands and sleepy towns that time seemed to have gently passed by. I found the address from the birth certificate without much trouble, a small, neat house on a quiet street. My hands were slick on the steering wheel. What would I find? An elderly woman who was my half-sister. Resentment. A closed door. I sat in the car for a long time, gathering courage. Finally, I walked up the path and knocked. The woman who answered was perhaps in her late 60s, with kind eyes and a warm smile. I asked if she knew an Elizabeth Reed. Her smile faded, replaced by a look of profound sadness. "Oh, honey," she said softly. "Lizzie Reed? She hasn't lived here in 50 years. But, are you family?" I stumbled over my words, explaining I was researching my mother's history. She invited me in. Her name was Martha, and she'd lived in Mill Creek her whole life. Over a cup of tea, she told me what she knew. Lizzie was raised by her grandmother, old Mrs. Reed. Sweet girl. There was a story, a sad one. Her mother, they said, was a girl from town who'd gotten in trouble with a boy who died in the war. She gave the baby to her mother to raise and, well, she left. Disappeared. Started a new life somewhere else. Lizzie always wondered about her. It was a heartache she carried her whole life. My mother. She didn't just have a secret. She had left a child behind. She had walked away from her daughter to start over. The image of my steadfast, reliable mother making that impossible choice was staggering. The pain of it must have been unimaginable. Martha didn't know what happened to Elizabeth. She'd moved away after her grandmother died. But she did know someone who might. She gave me an address for a woman named Agnes Miller, who'd been Lizzie's best friend since childhood. Agnes lived in a nearby town, in a retirement community. She was sharp, with bright eyes that missed nothing. When I mentioned Elizabeth Reed, her face lit up. Lizzie. My goodness. Best friend I ever had. I told her I believed Elizabeth was my half-sister. I showed her the photo of my mother and James. Agnes's hand flew to her mouth. That's them, she whispered. That's Lizzie's parents. She had that same photo, kept it hidden, just like her mother must have. She looked for her mother for years, you know. After her grandmother passed, she hired a detective, everything. But Eleanor Reed had vanished completely. My mother, it seemed, had been thorough in her disappearance. She had buried Eleanor Reed of Mill Creek and become Eleanor of Ohio, wife of Bill, mother to 2 new sons. She had built a wall around her past so high, no one could scale it. Agnes's face grew somber. I'm so sorry to tell you this, she said, her voice gentle. But Lizzie passed away 5 years ago. Cancer. It was quick, at the end. The hope I hadn't even realized I was fostering drained out of me, leaving me hollow. I was too late. Decades too late. My sister was gone. The chance to know her, for her to know her mother hadn't forgotten her, was lost forever. I asked if she had any family. Agnes nodded. Oh, yes. A daughter. She's a teacher, I believe. Lives over in Harrisburg. Her name is Sarah. Sarah Callahan. A daughter. A niece. I had a niece. The loss of Elizabeth was a profound sorrow, but this was a thread of light in the darkness. I thanked Agnes profusely, my mind already racing ahead to Harrisburg. Finding Sarah Callahan was easier than I expected. A phone book, a phone call. My voice shook as I introduced myself. I told her I believed her mother, Elizabeth, and my mother, Eleanor, were related. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, a quiet, hesitant voice. My mother, she spent her whole life wondering about her mother. She died still wondering. We agreed to meet. The next day, in a quiet coffee shop in Harrisburg, I waited. When Sarah walked in, it was like seeing a ghost. She had my mother's eyes. The same shape, the same clear, direct gaze. She had the same slight build. She was in her 40s, poised, with an intelligent, curious expression. I stood up, my heart hammering against my ribs. I showed her the photos from the lockbox. I told her the story, the one I was still piecing together myself. I told her about James, the letters, the birth certificate, my mother's quiet life in Ohio. She listened, her eyes never leaving mine, tears welling but not falling. When I finished, she reached into her own bag and pulled out a small, framed photograph. It was of her mother, Elizabeth. And the resemblance to my mother in her youth was unmistakable. She looked for her, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. She never stopped. She just wanted to know why. Why she left. If she was loved. I had no answer for that. The why was the locked box itself. The why was the silent burden my mother carried every day of her life. We talked for hours. Sarah filled in the blanks of Elizabeth's life. She'd been a school librarian, beloved by her students. She'd married a good man, had Sarah, lived a full, happy life, but the mystery of her mother was a shadow that never quite left her. She'd named Sarah's middle name Eleanor, a silent tribute to the woman she never knew. The symmetry of it took my breath away. I invited Sarah to come home with me to Ohio. I wanted her to see where her grandmother had lived, to meet her uncle, David. The drive back was a pilgrimage of sorts, a weaving together of two separate threads of a family torn apart by time and circumstance. Telling David was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I laid out the contents of the lockbox on his kitchen table, just as I had on mine. His face went through the same journey of shock, disbelief, and dawning, heartbreaking understanding. He looked at Sarah, saw our mother's eyes looking back at him, and without a word, he pulled her into a fierce, silent hug. The brother she never knew she had. We went through my mother's things again, this time with Sarah. We were looking for clues, for any hint she had left behind, any message for the daughter she'd lost. We found nothing more in the house. But then Sarah, drawn to the old photo albums, sat on the floor and began to slowly turn the pages. She stopped at a picture of my mother, taken in her 60s, standing in her prized rose garden. She loved roses, Sarah said softly. My mother, her favorite flower was a rose. A particular kind, a deep pink one called a Queen Elizabeth rose. A chill went down my spine. My mother's garden was a legend in our neighborhood. It was her pride and joy. And right in the center of it, the centerpiece she tended with such devoted care, was a massive, sprawling Queen Elizabeth rose bush. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a monument. A silent, living memorial to the daughter she could never acknowledge, but could never, ever forget. Every spring, when those roses bloomed, their profound, fragrant beauty was her private act of remembrance, her silent apology whispered on the wind. She had not erased Elizabeth. She had planted her in the sun, at the very heart of her new life, for anyone to see, if only they knew to look. The final piece of the puzzle came weeks later, as we were preparing to donate some of Mom's old books. A volume of poetry, a collection by Emily Dickinson, felt oddly heavy. I opened it. The pages had been hollowed out. Inside the secret compartment was a single, sealed envelope, yellowed with age. On the front, in my mother's elegant handwriting, it read, "For Elizabeth." My hands trembled so violently I could barely open it. Inside was a letter, written much later in her life, the handwriting more measured, but still hers. My dearest Elizabeth, if you are reading this, then you have found your way home, and I am gone. How I have longed for this day, and dreaded it in equal measure. There is not a day that has passed that I have not thought of you, have not ached for you. The decision I made was born of desperation and a fear I was too young to overcome. I was told, by my own mother, that giving you to her to raise was the only way. That a child born out of wedlock would ruin any chance of a future for me, and for you. She promised me you would be loved, cared for, that you would have a good life. She made me promise to leave, to never return, to never contact you, lest the scandal follow us both and destroy the life she could give you. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. Leaving you behind broke me in ways I never truly repaired. I loved your father, James, with my entire soul. His death shattered my world. You were the last, precious piece of him left to me. Letting you go felt like losing him all over again. I built a life, yes. I had 2 wonderful sons who I loved dearly. But a part of my heart always remained with you, in Mill Creek. I followed your life as best I could from a distance, through whispers and rare, guarded letters from old friends. I knew you became a librarian. I knew you had a daughter. I am so proud of the woman you became. Please know that my love for you was the constant, silent melody of my life. It is in the roses I plant, in the songs I hum, in the quiet moments of every day. I chose a life of silence to protect you, as I was convinced was right. I can only pray it was the right choice, and that you can find it in your heart to forgive a frightened young girl who loved you more than life itself. All my love, forever, your mother. We read it together, Sarah, David, and I, tears streaming down our faces. The mystery was solved. The secret was exposed, not as an act of cold abandonment, but as a heartbreaking sacrifice made by a grieving young woman, guided by the harsh conventions of a different time, manipulated by a grandmother who thought she was doing what was best. My mother hadn't been hiding a shameful secret. She had been guarding a sacred, painful wound. Her entire life was not a lie. It was a testament to resilience, to the enduring power of a love so strong it could survive 6 decades of silence. She had loved us, her sons, with a full and present heart, all while carrying this other, immense love for a daughter she could only love from afar. The story of my mother was not simpler than I had known. It was infinitely more complex, more beautiful, and more tragic. She wasn't just a woman who made apple pie. She was a war widow, a grieving lover, a mother who made an impossible choice and lived with its consequences every single day. She was stronger, and carried more pain, than I could have ever imagined. And her final lesson to us was not about secrecy, but about the profound, often hidden, depths of a mother's love. It's a story I needed to share, a piece of her legacy that needed to see the light. So if this journey into the past has resonated with you, if it's made you think of the untold stories in your own family, well, perhaps give this video a like, subscribe for more tales like this, and share your own stories in the comments below. Because the greatest secrets are often not lies waiting to be uncovered, but loves waiting, finally, to be understood.